My daughter ran toward me with tears on her face before the party had even started. I thought someone had pushed her or taken her toy. Instead, she pointed back toward the entrance where my sister Yara was standing near the guest list. "Mom," she said, "we shouldn't be here." At first, I didn't understand. Then I heard my sister say it again, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "There's no room for discount store kids at this party." The room went quiet for a second. Most people expected me to argue or grab my daughter and leave, but I did something completely different. And what happened after that moment changed the entire tone of the evening in a way my sister never expected. When the invitation arrived, it looked completely normal. It was a colorful card for a big birthday party. Nala's older sister Yara was celebrating her son's birthday and had rented a large community hall for the event. The card said the party would be big, with many relatives, neighbors, and family friends coming together to celebrate. There would be games for the children, music, and a large dinner for everyone. On the surface, it looked like a warm family gathering where everyone was welcome. Nala looked at the invitation for a long moment. Her relationship with Yara had never been easy. Over the years, small arguments had slowly turned into distance between them. Yara often cared a lot about appearances, money, and what other people thought. Nala, on the other hand, lived a much simpler life. She worked full-time, paid her bills carefully, and focused most of her energy on raising her young daughter. Because of these differences, the sisters rarely spent much time together. Still, when Nala read the invitation again, she thought about her daughter first. The little girl loved family gatherings. She enjoyed playing with her cousins, running around with the other children, and feeling like she belonged to a big family. Nala knew that if she ignored the invitation, her daughter would miss that chance. She didn't want her child to feel separated from the rest of the family just because the adults had their own issues. For a moment, Nala wondered if the invitation was only sent out of politeness. Sometimes families invited everyone simply to avoid questions from other relatives. But the card clearly had her name on it, and it mentioned that all close family members were expected to come. After thinking about it carefully, Nala decided she would go. She told herself that the party was not about old disagreements between sisters. It was about a child's birthday and a chance for the younger cousins to spend time together. If she stayed calm and focused on her daughter's happiness, the evening could still be pleasant. So Nala placed the invitation on the table and began planning. She chose a simple gift for her nephew and picked out clean, comfortable clothes for her daughter. As far as she knew, it would just be another family party like many others. At that moment, nothing about the invitation suggested that the evening would become one of the most unforgettable nights their family had ever experienced. Over the years, Nala slowly built a quiet and stable life for herself and her daughter. It was not a life full of luxury or expensive things, but it was steady and honest. Every morning, she woke up early, prepared breakfast, got her daughter ready for school, and then went to work. Her job was not glamorous, but it paid the bills and helped her provide everything her child truly needed. Nala always believed that safety, kindness, and peace at home were more important than showing off wealth to others. Most of the money she earned went toward rent, school supplies, groceries, and saving a little for the future. Sometimes her daughter asked for toys or clothes she saw other kids wearing, and Nala would smile and explain that they would buy it later when the time was right. Her daughter had learned to understand this simple life. Their home was small, but it was filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and quiet dinners after long days. Yara lived very differently. For Yara, appearances mattered a lot. She liked people to notice her lifestyle. When she hosted gatherings, she made sure everything looked impressive. Decorations were always expensive, the food had to be perfect, and she often talked about brands, vacations, and the people she knew. When relatives visited, she carefully controlled how everything looked so that the house, the party, and even the guests would create a certain image. Many relatives admired Yara because her life looked exciting from the outside. Her parties were always large, and people often talked about how elegant everything seemed. But sometimes, during those gatherings, small comments about money or status would quietly slip into her conversations. Nala had noticed this many times before. That was one of the reasons the sisters had grown distant over the years. Nala never liked comparing lives or measuring people by what they owned. Still, they were family. Even though their lifestyles were completely different, they were raised in the same home and shared the same relatives. That connection remained, even when their paths had gone in opposite directions. Nala simply believed that respect and kindness mattered more than status. Yara believed that reputation and image were important. And soon, at that birthday party, those two very different ways of living were about to meet in one very uncomfortable moment. On the day of the party, Nala and her daughter arrived a little earlier than most guests. The community hall looked bright and busy from the outside. Colorful balloons were tied near the doors, and music could already be heard from inside. Several cars were parked nearby, and children were running around excitedly. Nala held her daughter's hand as they walked toward the entrance, carrying a neatly wrapped birthday gift for her nephew. Right at the doorway, a long table had been placed as a check-in area. A guest list lay on top of it, and small gift bags for the children. Standing behind the table was Yara. She was dressed elegantly and greeting every guest with a bright smile. As people arrived, she checked their names, gave quick hugs, and welcomed them warmly before they entered the hall. When Nala and her daughter stepped closer, Yara looked up. For a moment, her smile stayed in place, just like it had for the other guests. She greeted Nala briefly and glanced down at the list on the table. The moment felt normal, like any family event, where relatives simply checked in and walked inside. Nala's little girl stood quietly beside her, holding the gift with both hands and looking excited to see her cousins. She could already hear children laughing inside the hall, and she tried to peek past the doorway to see the decorations. Yara slowly ran her finger down the list, as if confirming something. Then she looked up again, this time focusing on the little girl standing next to Nala. Her voice became quieter. She leaned slightly forward and asked a simple question, but the tone felt different. "And you are planning to bring her inside too?" For a moment, Nala didn't fully understand what she meant. The question sounded strange, especially at a child's birthday party where children were the main guests. Nala looked down at her daughter and then back at Yara. "Yes," she answered calmly. "Of course." The little girl squeezed her mother's hand, still smiling, still expecting to walk inside and join the other children. But something in Yara's expression had already changed. Her polite smile had faded just enough to make the moment feel uncomfortable. The entrance that was supposed to be a simple welcome suddenly felt like a quiet test, and Nala could already sense that this small conversation at the door was about to turn into something much more serious than she had expected. For a few seconds after Nala answered, the space near the entrance became very quiet. Yara looked at the little girl again, then back at Nala. The smile she had been showing to other guests was gone now. Instead, her face carried a strange expression, like she was trying to decide whether to say something or stay silent. A couple of relatives were standing nearby, waiting to check in. They were chatting softly and watching the interaction without paying too much attention. Nala's daughter was still holding the birthday gift carefully, looking excited to go inside and see the decorations and her cousins. Then Yara leaned slightly closer to the table and spoke again. This time, her voice was not as quiet. "Well," she said slowly, glancing at the girl's simple dress and shoes, "this party is supposed to look a certain way." Nala felt something uncomfortable in the air, but she stayed calm. She didn't respond right away. She simply waited to understand what Yara meant. Yara sighed lightly and then said the words that changed everything. "There's no room for discount store kids at this party." The sentence hung in the air like something heavy. For a moment, nobody moved. The relatives standing near the entrance suddenly stopped talking. One of them turned their head slightly, clearly having heard the comment. Another guest, who had just walked up the steps toward the door, paused when the words reached them. Nala's daughter slowly looked down at her own clothes. Her small hands tightened around the gift box. She didn't fully understand the meaning of the sentence, but she could feel that something was wrong.
Children are very quick to notice when adults speak about them in an unfriendly way. Her excitement disappeared almost instantly. Her face turned red with embarrassment, and her eyes began to fill with tears. She stepped closer to her mother, hiding slightly behind Nala's arm. "Mom?" she whispered quietly, confused and hurt at the same time. The entrance, which had been full of happy noise just moments earlier, now felt tense. Some guests looked away, pretending not to notice what had just been said. Others stayed completely silent, unsure whether they should react. Yara, however, simply stood there behind the table as if the comment was nothing important. But for Nala's daughter, those few words were enough to make her feel like she didn't belong at the party at all. And everyone standing near the door had heard it. For a moment after the comment, Nala didn't say anything. She could feel her daughter's small hand holding her arm tightly. When she looked down, she saw tears slowly forming in her daughter's eyes. The excitement that had filled her face only minutes earlier was completely gone. Nala bent down gently and placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly. "Stay with me." Her daughter nodded quietly, trying not to cry, but it was clear she felt embarrassed and confused. She had come to a birthday party expecting laughter, games, and cake. Instead, she was standing at the door feeling like she had done something wrong. Nala slowly stood up again. Many people would have reacted immediately. Some might have argued, shouted, or grabbed their child and walked away in anger. For a brief second, Nala felt that same heat rising in her chest. But she didn't react that way. Instead, she took a slow breath and stepped slightly to the side with her daughter, moving away from the check-in table. She did not want her child to stand there while more people arrived and possibly heard the same hurtful words again. As she stepped aside, she noticed something interesting. Several relatives had clearly heard the comment. Two of her cousins were standing near the entrance, looking uncomfortable. An older aunt held her purse tightly and kept glancing between Yara and Nala. A few guests who had just walked up the steps toward the door paused when the words reached them. Nala's daughter slowly looked down at her own clothes. Her small hands tightened around the gift box. She didn't fully understand the meaning of the sentence, but she could feel that something was wrong. Children are very quick to notice when adults speak about them in an unfriendly way. Her excitement disappeared almost instantly. Her face turned red with embarrassment, and her eyes began to fill with tears. She stepped closer to her mother, hiding slightly behind Nala's arm. "Mom?" she whispered quietly, confused and hurt at the same time. The entrance, which had been full of happy noise just moments earlier, now felt tense. Some guests looked away, pretending not to notice what had just been said. Others stayed completely silent, unsure whether they should react. Yara, however, simply stood there behind the table as if the comment was nothing important. But for Nala's daughter, those few words were enough to make her feel like she didn't belong at the party at all. And everyone standing near the door had heard it. As Nala stood quietly near the entrance with her daughter, she tried to focus on calming the little girl. She gently wiped the tears from her daughter's face and told her to stay close for a moment. The noise from inside the hall continued. Children were laughing, music was playing softly, and guests were moving around the decorated tables. From the outside, the party still looked cheerful and welcoming. While Nala waited, her eyes slowly moved around the entrance area. She noticed the colorful balloons tied to the door and the bright birthday banner hanging on the wall. Then something else caught her attention. Near the doorway, a large printed banner had been placed against the wall. It looked like a thank you sign. At the top, it said that the event was made possible with support from several community sponsors. Under the message were a few small logos and names of local programs and organizations. At first, Nala was only reading it casually, but then one of the names made her pause. She leaned a little closer and read it again to make sure she was not mistaken. One of the sponsors listed on the banner was a community development program connected to a small local business cooperative. The cooperative helped small businesses in the area by providing support, discounts for events, and shared services for community gatherings. Nala knew that program very well. In fact, she knew it better than most people in the room. Month earlier, she was part of the advisory board that reviewed funding requests for that same program. Her role was not public or glamorous. She simply helped review applications and approve which community projects would receive support from the cooperative. One of the requests they had approved was for community events that helped bring families and small businesses together. The program often offered venue discounts and service support for local celebrations. Nala looked from the banner toward the hall again. She suddenly realized something important. The decorated hall, the rental discount, and possibly some of the services used for this birthday party might have been provided through the same community program she helped manage. Most guests walking into the party probably saw the banner without thinking much about it. To them, it was just a list of sponsors. But to Nala, it was something very familiar. She stood there quietly for a moment, looking at the banner again while her daughter held her hand. It was a small detail, but sometimes the smallest details reveal the biggest truths.
After noticing the sponsor banner, Nala stayed quiet for a few moments. She did not want to jump to conclusions. Her daughter was standing close beside her, holding her hand tightly. The little girl had stopped crying, but she still looked unsure about going inside the hall. Nala gently squeezed her daughter's hand and said, "Stay here with me for a minute." Then she looked around the entrance area again. A few people were still arriving, and Yara was busy greeting them at the check-in table. Near the side of the hall, Nala noticed a man wearing a badge and speaking with the catering staff. From the way he was giving instructions and checking things, it was clear he was helping manage the event. Nala walked slowly toward him while keeping her daughter close. "Excuse me," she said politely. The man turned and smiled in a professional way. "Yes, how can I help you?" Nala pointed lightly toward the banner near the entrance. "I was just looking at the sponsor list. This event received support from the local cooperative program, right?" The coordinator nodded. "Yes, that's correct." Nala continued calmly. "Can you tell me how the sponsorship worked for this event?" The man did not see anything unusual about the question. He simply explained the details. "The family applied for support through the cooperative program," he said. "Because the event is a community celebration, they received a venue discount and help with some services. The program helped lower the rental cost for the hall, and a few vendors also provided reduced prices through the same arrangement." Nala listened quietly while he spoke. "So the venue discount came through that program?" she asked. "Yes," the coordinator confirmed. "Without that support, the rental price would have been much higher. The cooperative also connected the family with some of the event suppliers." Nala nodded slowly. Everything he said matched exactly with what she already knew about the program. Months earlier, when she sat with the advisory board reviewing requests, she had approved funding for community events just like this one. The program existed to help families organize gatherings while also supporting local businesses. The coordinator continued speaking, unaware of the deeper meaning behind Nala's quiet questions. "It's actually a very helpful program," he added. "A lot of events in this area only happen because of it." Nala gave a small, calm smile. "Thank you," she said. Then she gently took her daughter's hand again and stepped back toward the entrance, now understanding something many people in the room did not yet realize. As the party continued, laughter and music filled the hall. Children ran around with balloons, and tables were full of colorful decorations and snacks. Nala stayed close to her daughter, who was slowly beginning to smile again, feeling more comfortable as she watched her cousins play. Nala kept her eyes moving around the room, quietly noticing how everything was organized, who was talking to whom, and how much effort had gone into making the celebration special. Then the host of the party stepped up in front of the guests. She had a microphone and a bright smile, and everyone paused for a moment to listen. The room grew a little quieter as people turned to see what she was about to say. "Before we continue with the cake and games, I want to take a moment to thank the cooperative program that made this event possible." Nala's attention immediately sharpened. She recognized the name of the program, one she had worked with months ago. The host continued, explaining how the cooperative had provided a venue discount and helped arrange services to make the celebration affordable for the family. Then came the part Nala hadn't expected. "I'd also like to invite someone very special to briefly acknowledge the program and its support," the host said. looking toward Nala. "Nala, would you please say a few words?" For a moment, Nala was taken aback. Many eyes were now on her, including relatives, neighbors, and a few friends she barely knew. Her heart beat faster, but she stayed calm. She stepped forward with her daughter beside her and smiled softly. "Thank you," Nala began, her voice steady. "I am proud to be part of this program. It helps families and local businesses come together and create events like this. I'm glad I could help make today possible for everyone." The room seemed to pause. Guests who had been busy chatting or taking photos now stopped and listened. Some whispered to each other, surprised to learn that this community initiative had played a major role in the celebration. Nala noticed a few relatives glancing at her with new expressions, as if seeing her in a different light. The little details of her quiet work behind the scenes suddenly became clear to everyone. Her daughter looked up at her mother, smiling widely now, no longer feeling out of place. For the first time that evening, the focus in the room shifted. It was no longer about appearances or who wore what, but about the real help and effort that had made the party possible. Nala's quiet contribution became visible to everyone, and the atmosphere started to change in a way no one had expected. After Nala finished speaking, the room was quiet for a moment. Guests who had been busy chatting or taking photos now turned their attention toward her. Some faces showed surprise, others curiosity, and a few looked almost embarrassed as they connected the dots. The same people who had overheard Yara's comment about discount store kids were now seeing a very different reality. Nala's daughter tugged gently at her mother's hand, smiling shyly, and Nala gave her a small, reassuring nod. The little girl could sense the change in the room, though she didn't fully understand. The adults around them, however, were beginning to notice things they had overlooked before. One cousin whispered to another, "Wait, she helped make this party possible?" Another relative, who had been glancing at decorations and ignoring the banner, now leaned closer and read the sponsor names again, realizing that Nala had a role in organizing the support. Small groups of guests began talking quietly among themselves. "I didn't know she worked with the cooperative. She helped so many families get support, and now we see how this event happened." Another added, "All this effort, and here she is being so calm and humble about it." Even some neighbors who had come to observe the party now had a different impression of Nala. Their whispers weren't about status or clothing anymore. They were about her contribution, her thoughtfulness, and the real impact she had on the community. Yara, standing near the check-in table, could feel the change in the atmosphere too. Guests who had previously smiled politely at her or complimented her decorations now were looking toward Nala with interest, listening to what people were saying. Some relatives exchanged glances, realizing how dismissive Yara's earlier remark had been. Nala noticed the shift quietly. She didn't boast or draw attention to herself. She simply stayed near her daughter and smiled when someone politely thanked her for helping the cooperative program. Every word she had spoken carried more weight than any argument could have. The tone of the entire room had begun to change. Conversations about appearances, about who wore what, and about social status were replaced with genuine respect. People were now talking about Nala's efforts, her contributions, and the way she quietly made a difference. Her calm response and the truth of her work had transformed the energy in the room. What had started as a hurtful moment at the entrance was now becoming a turning point. The focus had shifted from judgment to understanding, from gossip to respect, and from appearances to real value. And Nala, standing quietly with her daughter, watched it all unfold with a quiet sense of satisfaction. By the end of the night, the party had completely changed. The music was still playing, children were laughing, and the tables were full of food and decorations, but the energy in the room felt different. Instead of whispers about what people wore or whose family seemed better, conversations had shifted. Guests were now talking about the cooperative program and how it helped make the celebration possible. They were impressed to learn that someone so calm and modest had quietly contributed so much behind the scenes. Nala stood near the center of the room with her daughter, watching quietly. Her little girl ran off to join her cousins, laughing freely and no longer hesitant or embarrassed. The tension from earlier had vanished from her face.
Nala felt a warm sense of relief as she saw her daughter included, playing games and chasing balloons without a single worry. People who had once judged Nala or ignored her were now speaking with respect, asking polite questions about the program and complimenting her efforts. Even some of those who had overheard Yar's hurtful remark were reconsidering what they thought they knew. They now understood that appearances were not the only thing that mattered. Real impact, quiet dedication, and community work were just as important, sometimes far more. Yara, standing near the side of the hall, noticed the change too. The smiles that had once been directed mostly toward her decorations and status were now turning toward Nala with interest. She could feel the shift in attention, and she could see that her earlier comment had lost its power. The room had moved on, not with conflict, but with recognition of truth. The moment that began with an insult at the entrance had transformed completely. Nala had not argued, shouted, or tried to prove herself in anger. She had simply stayed calm, observed, and quietly allowed the facts to speak. The truth of who she was and what she contributed had become visible to everyone. By the end of the party, it was no longer about status, appearances, or family drama. It was about connection, respect, and the positive impact one person could have when they worked quietly for the good of others. Nala's daughter went home that night smiling, tired but happy, feeling like she truly belonged. And Nala walked out quietly too, knowing that the simple act of patience and truth had changed the tone of the entire evening, leaving an impression no one would forget.